the factory like?
Well, it was wartime to begin with, so it was cold very often. They didn't have enough fuel for heating. And many's a time we worked with our outdoor clothes on because it was so cold.
This Year 6 class has adopted an unusual approach to Key Stage 2 history. It's devoted a series of whole mornings to the study of a local history project. In one of the lessons, their teacher, Julia Christmas, invited women who used to work in the local tobacco industry into the classroom, and the children used video and digital stills cameras in interviews with the women as they recalled their working lives.
They had Bristol City used to come round once a year, and we used to decorate the room in Rovers colours. And then Rovers used to come and we decorate it in Bristol City colours. And then Eric Bristow come round when he won the World.
To assess how well the teacher's overall approach and the lesson itself worked, we asked Michael Riley, who teaches at Bath Spa University College, to analyse the lesson, and the teacher herself to respond to his comments.
And I became very interested in how the tobacco factory had changed, so it was like part of my own interest in it.
What a great project. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, first of all, to devote a whole morning to history really is quite unusual and brave, really, but it's in the spirit of excellence and enjoyment, really. I think the really interesting thing is that it starts with Julia's personal interest in this building, and she's using one building and some women who worked in that building to bring the history to life for the children. And I thought it was really interesting at the beginning there, seeing how closely the children were listening to the women who'd come in. Clearly they were fascinated by the whole thing and were just really interested in this particular project, really.
Julia had invited several women to talk to the children over the course of the morning.
How many cigars did you make a day?
The more you made, the more you got paid.
You had a certain amount to make, and then if you made over that, you weren't...
Oral history and women's history can be neglected, really, in the curriculum. It's much easier for schools to kind of use published resources or to use kind of commercially available video material than get people in or to take children to archives and get them engaging with first-hand testimony. So for all those reasons, it's such a rich project.
Great. I love that, because that's the whole that part of history is that it's always been dominated by men for so long, and that is so, for me personally as a teacher, that's great to hear.
Conditions were good though. I mean, we had everything that they provided, a dentist, there was a medical department, you could have physiotherapy if it was needed. They came round every year with the mobile X-ray machines for us, so they looked after us well. There was a chiropodist, well, practically anything.
One of the things we're often trying to get across to children in primary and secondary history is the idea that people have a kind of diversity of experience in the past. You know, the past is complicated. There isn't just one view. People experience the past in different ways. And what's really interesting is to hear the different memories of the different women and what resonates with them. They all had different experiences of working in this factory. They all had different home lives. They all connected with the factory in different ways. And it's really interesting to hear those experiences. And clearly the children are fascinated by that. Let me just show you what I mean.
So I sort of went into the cloakroom, getting me coat
Schools that are brave enough to use oral history and to bring elderly people from the community into classrooms to talk to children, we often just bring one person into the classroom. And if we're not careful, that can turn into children sometimes listening to a kind of pre-prepared recital almost. What this has is an amazing kind of freshness.
Right, what I'd like you to tell me is what you...
Before the women arrived, the class discussed the learning objectives.
So could you give me some ideas of what you'd like to get out of this morning? Sophie?
Lots of information.
Lots of information. What else would you get out of it? Josh?
Experience of using equipment.
Yeah, experience of using equipment.
Here's when it can be firmer, really. It's interesting, the objectives that the children come up with here are very much framed on using the skills in terms of using the equipment, they are to do with collecting information in history. And really there's a point at which here it's up to the teacher to determine exactly what historical understanding and skills and knowledge are going to be developed through this whole sequence of learning in history.
What was your boss like?
They were all very good. Yeah. When we started in the cigar factory, it was a very sort of small concern.
It's seen as kind of information gathering. And we need to go beyond that to take the children deeper into, well, yes, we are gathering information, but how are we deploying it? For what purpose? What do we want children to understand about women's lives and the way in which women's lives have changed over the last 70 years? It's those kind of areas that I think really need to be pretty firm at the start of any sequence of learning in history.
I feel the questioning was from the children. It was their first time actually being interviewing somebody to do with history in the class. It was part of their community, and I wanted them purposely to take ownership of it.
Oh, amazing.
This is us two, myself and Eileen.
Photographs were an important part of the lesson. Some were brought in by the women themselves, others were researched by the teacher. The photographs became the starting point for children's questions about the women's working lives.
That's the machine.
Yeah, that's the machine. That's how we sat. And you'd be able to talk to one another and cheat.
A number of the photographs had been laminated, and children were able to write questions and comments on them.
What have we got on the picture? If you identify what... Yeah, so we've got somebody with a... What do you think it is? It's a mop or a brush, isn't it? The quality of the photo's not very good. And what have we got here?
Probably can't see. There it is.
You see it on that one?
I thought the use of photographs here was really inspired in that Julia's combining different historical sources. She has the oral history, and I think many teachers would be happy to just focus on the oral history in the morning. Here Julia is bringing together photographs with the reminiscences of the women, which is great, and that's kind of high-level historical skill, children combining the evidence from the photographs and the evidence from the oral history. That's great.
Can you, even more interesting, can you recognise these windows? This is the tobacco factory.
Is it the ones upstairs?
I know them very well. No, it's not the one upstairs.
In the big hall, the way to the toilets in the big...
It's downstairs.
Downstairs.
Yeah. So where do you think it is downstairs?
Is it by the ones that goes into where the bar is?
Yeah. So look, down this corner here is the entrance. I think this is right.
It's really interesting here to see her questioning at one point hit a cul-de-sac, because we've all experienced that in different ways. And trying to think why that's happened, I think, goes back to the whole issue of structure. Is there clarity here about the understanding that Julia hopes to develop in children's minds through the use of the photographs? And perhaps that could be firmer. So, rather ironically in a sense, we need to initially put more structure with that learning activity on the photographs in order that children can develop more independent thinking.
I was trying to make them understand, to relate to, there's an image of a place. Actually, you know that place, and you've been in there, and it's relating the reality of an actual building that we use now used to be the tobacco factory, used as a factory, and that's where the women worked. So I was trying to lead them down that, but because I must admit, because I had so many people, groups to work with, and the dynamics, I didn't follow that through, but I did learn from it and think, right, if I'd done that again, I'd have had the photograph of the tobacco factory as it is now, and the tobacco factory then, and I'd have taken them to see it.
The class made extensive use of ICT. Some children used digital stills cameras and others handheld video. In a subsequent lesson, they edited the still images and video rushes and went on to make PowerPoint and edited presentations of their work.
There's a danger whenever we put kind of ICT and history together that some children can, if you like, just have an ICT experience. For example, the children doing the filming are going to be having to concentrate very fully on that filming at that moment in time. And that's fine, actually. They might not be listening to what the women are saying even. They're just trying to get the right shot. And at that moment in time in the lesson, that seems to me to be perfectly acceptable. If at a later stage, the children doing the filming are going to have to sit down and think about what the women are saying in order to edit the material. And I think what we need to plan as teachers are sequences of lessons in history that combine ICT and history and integrate them so that children don't just have one experience or the other. It's the integration that's the key aspect of successful practice here, I think.
Right, let's just go back to what we decided this morning we were going to do, and let's see if we've done that.
At the end of this long morning, the class came back together in a plenary to review the lesson objectives.
Right, lots of information? Yeah. Lots of information? Yeah. Tons of information, haven't we? Yeah. Absolutely loads of information. First-hand information? Yeah. Some of the questions you asked, did you find you were...
I see this a lot in primary and secondary history, actually. The way in which you can almost judge whether there has been deep learning in history when you observe the plenary. And often in lessons we can have a rather kind of superficial plenary that's just focused on what knowledge children have acquired. But actually you can tell if there's kind of been deep learning if children are sharing their understanding and sharing the most significant things they've discovered in the plenary.
Our super celebs are about to leave, so can you give them a big thank you?
What's so lovely to me about this whole morning is the relationship really between these Year 6 children and the women who come into school. You know, there's great respect on both sides. There's great civility, there's politeness, there's really careful listening, there's lots of joking and laughter, there's lots of serious moments. It's just such a rich morning, isn't it, for children to develop their personal and social skills, and also for the women to kind of feel that they are still kind of connected to the community in that way and still have lots to offer these Year 6 children. I think that's just such a great strength of the whole morning's work, really.
I'm really pleased that that's what came out in the video. That's the best thing to me, is that the children were seen as they are in their best light. That's great.